All right, so the Labour Party has officially won the majority seats in the United Kingdom's general election. Of course, this by and large was expected. Let's get you a sense of how people in that country are responding to this outcome. Our correspondent in London is Stuart Smith, who joins us now live for the latest. And yeah, Stuart, we had always predicted it. It wasn't even close, many people have pointed out. Rishi Sunak saying this was a sobering outcome, and I suppose, given how somber the weather there is, he'll have a moment to reflect.
Yeah, no surprise whatsoever with the fact that this was a Labour majority. But when you look at the details, it is interesting to see how this election played out on Thursday. When you compare the Labour Party's vote share during this election, i.e. 34% of the electorate chose Labour, compare that to 2019 when 32% of the electorate chose Labour. Now, the difference, though, in reality, was a difference of 200 more seats. The last election in 2019 was a historic defeat for Labour. This one looks close to a historic win. So a huge difference, but the cause of that difference mostly due to voters simply rejecting the Conservative Party and voting for other parties instead. The Liberal Democrats picking up a huge number of seats compared to where they were before this election. They managed to achieve so many more seats, around 70 compared to around 15. So that will now become the third party in Parliament, the second opposition party. And Reform UK did incredibly well as well to get more seats than initially predicted. And so that means for the Conservative Party, it'll be time to try to think hard about what they could change. Labour has promised to fix the issues they've inherited from the Tory government. That includes an under-resourced NHS, a cost of living crisis here in the UK, and also, especially for right-wing voters, a massive concern about illegal immigration to England. Keir Starmer going to have a speech in around 3 to 4 hours' time once he is Prime Minister, meaning for the UK the fourth Prime Minister in 2 years.
Yeah, it's also interesting to see, I think it's Reform UK also making its way into Parliament, and its leader. I wonder what kind of dynamic you reckon they'll be bringing to the Parliament in the UK.
Absolutely. Nigel Farage is a household name in the UK. He's been in politics for decades. He's more well known than Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, according to polling, because he's the man that effectively led the Brexit campaign, which was successful, as we know. And he's now going to be in Parliament for the first time ever as an MP. He had tried many times before, but this is the first time he's been successful. And so there will be a change in the dynamic in Parliament with him both willing to, from the right of the party, take Conservatives to task, take the Labour Party to task, and the Liberal Democrats as well. That will be an interesting new dynamic in Parliament with such a vocal and also well-liked figure.
Absolutely. Before this, many might have pointed out that the Conservative Party has had a number of casualties in the lead up to this election outcome, including Liz Truss, and we, of course, all remember the circumstances under which she left office. I wonder where you reckon this leaves the organisation, given just how much time it's taken before they were ousted in this kind of election and the margin by which they've been ousted.
Yeah, there's a question as to what extent this changes anything for Labour by the fact that the vote share was surprisingly small for the amount of votes that they won. In terms of the way the UK system works, Labour has a firm majority in Parliament, which effectively means it can pass any legislation it wants, headed by Keir Starmer. And while the Conservatives are the official opposition, they are much reduced. It's unusual to have such a small opposition in Parliament, and so while they will be able to hold the Labour Party to task, there's going to be a host of soul-searching within the party as to what went wrong after 14 years in government, with voters so comprehensively rejecting the Conservatives, including a host of Conservative Party members of cabinet, seriously senior Conservative Party figures being rejected as well by the electorate. Now, some say that means the Conservative Party needs to lean more to the right. Reform managed to bite off big chunks of the Conservative Party's vote share. Should the party lean into that? Or, as Keir Starmer has so often alleged, he believes that the Conservative Party had a very lack of discipline, it was uncivil and was not serious about politics. Is more discipline what's required in the Conservative Party to try to reform its chances?
Interesting indeed. I can't help but notice the people singing behind you there, Stuart. Now, I'm not sure if that happens on any other day in London or if that's in direct response to this election outcome, but you're there. Help us, I suppose, get a sense, generally speaking, on how people have received this outcome.
Yeah, so there's no surprise, as we've seen in recent elections, no hung parliament, no coalition needed to be formed, no negotiations with other parties. The Labour Party was from the get-go likely to win, something that confused a lot of people when Rishi Sunak decided to call the election, because it always seemed like this would be the result, so why go quite so early? But in terms of the reaction, it seems like, as one commentator here put it, a loveless landslide for Labour. Win for Labour for sure, but not out of enthusiasm for Labour's policies, but a desire, as indeed that gentleman made clear, for the Conservative Party to leave government after 14 years, after so many scandals and a failure on many of their most important policy issues to actually address and fix them, despite the attempts by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Most people in this country just felt it was time for change. It'll be interesting to see whether Labour could provide the change that people seem to want.
Sure. Interesting dynamics indeed. Stuart Smith, great catching up. Thanks as always. Stuart is our SABC correspondent, live to us there from London in the United Kingdom. You heard him mention there that the incoming Prime Minister is set to give his own speech in about 3 to 4 hours or so. We know traditionally, of course, the Prime Minister takes residence in number 10 Downing Street, and that's the situation as things stand. So many men and women have walked through those doors, even in just the last decade, quite frankly, as the UK grapples with a myriad of issues, both at home and outside of the country's borders, whether it's to do with the cost of living crisis, as Stuart has mentioned, or the UK's standing globally when it comes to its position in Europe, whether it's part of the bloc that was the EU, and many other issues around its stance in the wars, both in Ukraine and, of course, in the Middle East. The task that lies ahead for Sir Keir Starmer is certainly not to be overstated, and we'll be listening very closely to whatever he has to say as he addresses the nation and, by extension, the world in his first address sometime this morning.